68. Be corrected. Ignorance creates difference of opinion. An idea without an evidence is nothing but a lie. A baseless idea is clean sin. An ignorant does not know and an inhuman does not obey. Ignorant are those who will go on believing the wrong ideas of their ancestors but will not accept the better ideas given by others. Those who think that truth depends on their belief and they don't depend on truth are conservatives. He who does not understand and cannot accept any advice is worthless. He is a fool who spends his money for an indefinite gain. He who worships a lifeless object is also a fool. He who spoils others' peace to establish his own peace is unreligious. A fool and ignorant and an illiterate is like a beast. He who lacks the sense of justification, unthoughtful and ignorant is misguided. It is ignorance which creates all kinds of unjustified and unwanted acts. The source of evil acts is the ignorance of the basic and practical knowledge about anything. People believe in universal truth and involve in temporary and false matters due to ignorance. Somebody, due to illiteracy of wickedness, wants to buy us rich, lust and salvation. Among these, salvation is the main knave. Ignorance is illiteracy. To consider a temporary matter as a permanent one is illiteracy. An illiterate man cannot assess himself and he too feels egoism. Ignorance, materialism or egoism. Addiction to subject or attachment. Envy, death, fear or close attention. Dark delusion, great delusion, gloom, deep gloom. There is no sin greater than ignorance. Everything has religious remedy but an ignorant has not remedy. Fools learn only by distress. Ignorance and misbehavior produce sins. Ignorance is the reason and sin is its result. Nobody commits a sin intentionally. Sin is the result of ignorance. If somebody commits a sin and then becomes ashamed, his sin reduces, and if somebody does a virtuous act and boasts of it, his virtue goes in vain. Don't he call a black man as black, a lame as a lame, a fool as a fool, a thief as a thief and a sinner as a sinner face to face. Moral conduct: killing a living being, stealing, adultery, lying, untrue speech, drinking wine, non-observance of chastity, taking meals at undue time, enjoying dance and music, using garlands and perfumes, using high and luxurious seat, accepting gold, silver and money etc. as a gift should be avoided. We should refrain from physical and oral misdeeds. Physical sins are violence, killing and torturing others, shamelessness, cruelty, theft and adulterous and desire. Verbal sins are lying, backbiting and harsh speaking. Mental sins are greed, discontent and bearing wrong notion. We should refrain from killing a creature unnecessarily, making gift of something which has been taken away, adultery plus. We should not tell a lie, backbiting, rude speech, chatter plus. We should not keep longing, anger, false doctrines plus. Reasoning, sexual desire, anger, harming. Sin is created in a mind and is destroyed in the mind itself. A man commits a sin when he very strongly feels to commit a desire. A man harms himself by involving himself in sinful deeds. A sinner deprives a right of a man and that of himself by committing a sin. It is sin which is the root of most of the problems. Discontent, father, harm to master and eating restricted food are to be avoided. Egoism, pious, positive, negative. Egoism, defective, negative and sense-perceptive. You will lose if you boast of yourself. Egoism, apart a man from his closest ones. If you can avoid egoism, everybody will be cordial to you. Egoism, a state, is pride and determination. Egoism and ignorance are two main reasons of all evils. Offensiveness is the combination of egoism and ignorance. Drive away egoism. Your mentality should be universal. Don't argue unnecessarily. Egoism and offensiveness hinder all progress. Egoism is like the salinity of seawater. A proud man is like that rooster who thinks that sun has risen to listen to its crowing. When a man's mental wideness is spoiled, he becomes egoistic. Egoism is to leave the truth boastfully and to neglect other. Egoism goes away and salvation is achieved by self-realization. Live egoism by mental treatment and calmness. To be egoistic, lack of sense of consideration is sufficient. Intelligence is not necessary for it. Man feels too much anxiety for a temporary house. It is surprising to see the anxieties and egoism of a man who was a drop of unholy sperm yesterday and will be a dead body tomorrow. He cannot feel pride who knows that nothing will remain at last. Don't you feel pride? Pride finishes a man. It is more terrible than death. What is the use of egoism and pride of aristocracy? This human body will perish at last. You will be condemned, hated, kept away, unfit, proved to be ungrateful, and even subject to rigorous punishment for egoism, pride and disobedience. Negative way of thinking and imagination, blaming others, searching for others' faults are sins and causes of all evils. Patiently neglect the negative attitudes. Others are disturbed for your negative attitudes, so avoid it. The mental negative attitude or dishonesty of a man is completely unholy. To do such act by which one aspires to fame is forbidden, and it is an inexcusable sin. Disbelief in the existence of Allah, making anybody as his partner, and doing unreligious acts bring destruction in this life and hereafter. The most inferior people in the world are those who deny the existence of Allah, don't accept his way of life, making somebody else as his partner and become slave of own desires, then become the slave of Allah. Hatreds of Allah and whole mankind are to them who die as an unbeliever in Allah. The result of atheism and making partner of Allah is the dissatisfaction of Allah and continuous punishment and harassment. Making partner of Allah is a clean lie, and it is an offense as grave as oppressing a man. Allah may forgive all sins of a man, but he will never forgive him who makes a partner of Allah. One should not make a partner of Allah and disobey his parents. Atheism, making a partner of Allah, or destroying soul are against integrity with Allah. If somebody is proud of his wealth and other facilities given by Allah and denies the mercy of Allah to him, is similar to making a partner of Allah. He who gives somebody or sells an amulet for protection makes a partner of Allah. He who does so, Allah won't give him a slight peace and relax. But when in an amulet for protection, Allah's different names are written, it is treated as a praise to Allah. To take any occurrence as a bad symptom without any reason is as same as making a partner to Allah. Don't believe in perjurers, and don't be envious. Don't return from the halfway being confused, but control yourself. He who does not keep himself away from sin group him sooner or later. When the desires of a man is fulfilled, a negative attitude or a sense of sin is created in his mind. A man sinks in sins when he is in extreme want. Sorrow, poverty and distress guide a man to sinful acts. Greed for money is the root of all sins. Distrust makes a man mentally hard and complicated. To delay in helping a man is wastage of power given by Allah. Oppression and taking interest of money will attack oneself like a boomerang. What is natural for gods and goddesses is a sin for a human being. Adultery kills substance and entity. Unlawfully greed for others' woman, others' belongings and defaming other are to be avoided. Give up greed and stealing others. He who purchases a stolen thing makes himself a partner of stealing. Everybody becomes a thief if gets opportunity. It is not right to take away a walking stick of somebody without the permission of the owner. Don't cut a joke as it will harm your prestige. Don't tell a lie as it will harm your belief in Allah. Don't search for others' faults, and don't circulate others' faults in their absence. Otherwise Allah will insult you although you remain in a corner of your house. To call other with bad names is a prohibited act, and to involve in war is a clear atheism. To create a quarreling atmosphere is more serious than murder. Threatening others is prohibited. If you hurt anybody mentally and if you don't pay other dues, you want to be treated as a believers in Allah. It is not justified to increase one's prestige at the cost of others' sufferings. Nobody likes a man who creates chaos. Allah won't forgive a person by his repentance and religious activities if he deprives another person of his rights and if the victim does not forgive him. Sinners will no doubt get punishment soon. Addiction makes a man inattentive to his work, encourages a man in indulging wrong acts, and an honest man loses his honor. The act which raises a confusion and which is not preferred to be expressed before other is a sin. As sin neglect religion. A sin can be forgiven but not its intention. To hurt a man mentally is the greatest sin. The greatest virtue is not hurt a man's feelings. There is no virtue or sin except it. He who commits a sin is a common man, he who repents after committing a sin is an honest man, and he who boasts of his sin is a devil. The act which increases your moral strength is a virtue, and the act which weakens you physically and mentally is a sin. A man generally repents for his sins when he becomes physically and mentally weak. A man then searches for a little shelter like a poor man. Then his careless attitude goes away. Then needs social support for all his activities. Then various fears run after him from all around. Leave all kinds of weakness. Weakness is as like as death. Weakness is a sin. Weakness can overtake the strong ones for some specific reasons. Mostly the cowards indulge themselves in sin. There is a time in everybody's life when he is fully emotional. He commits maximum wrong at that time. The one way to make an inactive man into an active one is to hurt him, insult him, or throw him in poverty. Don't encourage, cooperate with, or forgive a wrongdoer. To be hurt twice by the same stone is a proverbial insult. A man suffers from a sense of sin or repentance for his wrong acts or sins. This type of mental suffering can destroy a man's self-confidence and sense of prestige, and thus can spoil all his pleasure of life. He suffers who expects, and he becomes courageous who makes a mistake. The more a man makes mistake, the more he proceeds towards prosperity. We find out the ray of light after crossing the dark and narrow lanes. To err is human. It is meaningless to keep on magnifying a mistake and to make the life horrible. Sense of sin helps a man to analyze or consider his activities. It corrects wrong, harmful, offensive, envious, and destructive behaviors, and diverts a man from the wrong way of achieving self-interest and guides him to the right path of self-development. To be afraid of following the path of justice and morality, not to speak boldly, and to refrain from speaking the truth are also a kind of corruption. The more the corruption is encouraged, the more it will increase. A corrupted independent man is worse than a slave. The so-called educated society stands at the root of every chaos. It is the educated class that commits bribery, corruption, black marketing, and so on. So it is need to purity and amend of self-character. It is possible to exile the greed by maintaining a compatibility between desire and deserve through eradicating poverty and discrimination. We need political commitments, good governance, democratic and human rights, and access to information, because all these are interrelated. He who has no motion deals in politics. That is the principles of lootings, indenting, licensing, permitting, fluttering, smuggling, stalking, etc. have become a regular normal affairs. No more anyone suffers morally at the attack of morality, idealism, and humanitarian values. Now society is an open market of corruption. Here honesty, sincerity, principles, knowledge, merit, everything is sold like the consumer's products. Corruption of any government starts from moral devaluation. Corruption can never defeat honesty. When people remain free from corruption, law remains inactive there. And where people are fully indulged in corruption, law and order situation starts deteriorating there. Corruption is such a tree whose branches are too long and expanded widely. Where everybody is corrupted, no individual punishment is effective there. Corruption is the branches of a tree. It spreads very easily. There are two types of corruption: big corruption and petty corruption. In big corruption, a huge amount of money is grabbed at a time, like foreign loan, grant, etc. Petty corruption is taken place through a systematic way where people are financially harassed. Political corruptions are like the place of all the levels of government. Therefore civilian and military bureaucracy often engage in forms of auto-corruption by utilizing their position to their own personal or corporate gains. Black money is produced in two ways: through illegal means in legal sectors, earned through evading tax, fees, and illicit practices in legal sectors, for instance under invoice or over-invoice of letter of credits (LCS). Illegal ways in illegal sectors. The illegal sectors include bribe, smuggling, stock, adulteration, and creation of illegal institutions. Corrupt patterns always emerge. Money is spent by candidates or provided by contributors mainly because they expect something in return. Misuse of power as the root cause of corruption, and that can never be arrested unless such abuses were stopped right from the highest level. An exceptionally high level of pervasive and endemic corruption eats up national wealth and frustrates ventures for sustained economic growth to help people come out of the poverty trap. Lack of institutional reform, severe confrontational politics, criminalization of politics, deterioration of law and order, and fatal hemorrhage due to exceptionally high levels of pervasive and endemic corruption hindered sustainable economic growth. These factors give dissatisfied service delivery institutions, dysfunctional watchdog agencies, and deterioration of financial institutions. Who will come up to reduce the power of influential people to reduce corruption? There should be some check and balance, no doubt, but the thing should not be complicated. Because complications are the root cause of corruption. Then bureaucracy, both civil and military, is another obstacle in the way to economic development. According to them, development would lessen their importance as elite. Corruption inhibits the operation of market forces, create bureaucratic bottlenecks, obstruct planning objectives, introduce irrational elements into development programs, leads to leakages in the utilization of aid money, creates frustrations among honest people. Corruption and violence can be uprooted by a total reform in law enforcing process and method, and by anti-corruption measures with help of a team of experienced, efficient, successful, tested and selected administrative personnel. For this, an effective military force, an efficient inter-services forces, and a competent national security intelligence is required. Whether Act of Heart is amended, then Act of Outside must be amended and modified. The judiciary whether could not prevent the corrupt persons, the moral power of citizens start to break up. That bears defeating symptom. In that case, law brings an image of scarecrow fear. When birds understand that it is not harmful, then they make nests on scarecrow. Corruption increases law and rules, but delays application and justice. Because late justice benefits corrupt persons. Lesser than need and relaxed encourage corruption. The corruptions prevent natural activity of government and make the development unrealistic. The corruption and crime proportionately increases. Whether uninterrupted pressure is not created, honest and eligible persons are not in administration, there usually the corruption comes in existence more with pretense gentle form. The primary point of preventing corruption is to eliminate political pollution, which is the root cause of social pollution. To this extent, someone is blaming other one. Traders are blaming politician and bureaucrats are blaming politician and trader, again political persons are blaming bureaucrats and traders. The political parties having weak democracy creates anarchy to the political process. Uncounted parties have been organizing, proposing desire, then establishing ideology. These sorts of parties are devoted to achieve narrow interest, nomination then election. This irresponsible persons have been engaged with power of business. Now the parties are not centered on ideology but person-based. Today intergroup organizing among leaders are important. Politicians have been taking measure as defense to save them so that they will not liable for their misdeed. Some money and power seeker parasite depend on shelter provider. As the shelter provider failed to control properly, parasite grew deep and strong based on shelter provider, and at a certain time it weakened the shelter provider. These sorts of parasite create immorality, corruption, social anxiety, conflict and frustration and fierceness. As a result, non-transparency, non-accountability, non-skillness have been creating. The organized crime and corruption is a great barrier to the way of development. The risk is less and profit is high in corruption, so that reduces skills to the economics, increases level of expense of production. Selfishness, valuelessness, strengthless or negligence are different shape of insincerity. Not only financial disruption, the corruption and ignorance make us poor. The corruption decreases investment in economic development. It decreases necessary resource and makes deeper the poverty to human development. Makes ruin the judiciary system, hamper power of state. Corruption grows corruption. And where ministers are corrupted, in that case the officers of directorate are inactive and inefficient to provide penalty to the subordinate staffs. The slow judiciary is incapable to take proper decision. This culture of graft is top-down, not bottom-up. The government having corruption is nothing but organization of crime and shortfall. Here freedom and faith of citizen nothing is stood. Corruption has many forms, which is different based on the time and situation. The corrupted dishonest leaders conduct circus from case of monkey. Whether need-based corruption is started that transformed into the greed-based corruption and never deficit of need is done. Violator the law get executive position of state joining political party. The big positions of administration are distributed to higher bidder. Even at lower level, the position in place are distributed at the same method. The corrupted government provisions create wide corruption. That corruption is for the people and by the people. Whether policy or rule is not applicable to people but for certain class, and result of that would be torture. How much ruin result do have with weak ruling? The corruption is one of them. The voters take decision based on the emotion, consider the corruption as tolerable. By the finance man is how much purchasable, more is done by loyalty and expectation. The people cast vote to the principle-less leader, not having faith on him, but for fear or finance. The blind person cannot make any idea what is color. The vote casters should have right to elect political representatives and also to cancel elected persons. The corruption is breaking faith of people and erasing tie of society. General people do not come forward into claim against corruption, because they know that to show courage they will be victimized. The police makes role of uniform to the provision of conventional corruption. Police will have to make self-assessment and rise to the occasion to earn trust, confidence and respect of the people of the sovereign, independent country. To be effective law enforcers, police must elicit people's cooperation through their own actions and conduct. Causes of ineffectiveness of police: inadequacy of manpower and deficiencies in the organizational setup. Lack of transport, equipment, including arms and ammunition etc. Absence of confidence, willing cooperation of people, cooperative and cordial relationship with the magistracy. Defects in recruitment policy, training facilities and promotion procedure. No recording and minimization of crimes and correct crime statistics. Unsatisfactory and perfunctory investigation of offenses and prosecution of offenders. Interference in the discharge of duties by the police. Corruption in the police. Lack of strict discipline and effective supervision, inspection and control. Most of people are honest, they are not partner of crime, only victims. 95% people are suffering result of corruption done by 5%. It needs conscious and united people, who will banish graft persons from society successfully in group. Present education system and administrative system making loyal servile mentality through repressed, dull, inactivation. The real cause of corruption is cowardness, negligence and selfishness. Corruption is shelter of terrorism. More illogical tolerance is called cowardness. Weak person never can be easy. The cowards never can practice morality. The generation born in this environment be attracted to it embracing corruption. As a result moral life can be go astray. That turned into complexity shape in order for not solving in time by the mafia form of corrupted government. Each time influential situation creates first tolerance, later to receive and at last engagement. Likely we fall to the evil of corruption. If practices of corruption do everybody, then nobody can be called corrupt person. We have become habituated as all of our problems are pre-assessed. Poverty, petty thievery, tokai business, arms keeper, political cadre, smuggler, illegal toll collector, and matched with them the corruption of the police, judicial system and governmental agencies, and the verdict is inevitable that the milieu is conducive for have trajectory in the life and living. This only tells us that one requires some amount of education and social interactions to enter into the complex network of mass democracy. Individuals should choose to allocate their time between working in the legal job market or working in criminal activities in such a way that maximizes their utility. After accounting for the risk of being caught and penalized, the size of the penalty and any stigma or moral distress associated with involvement in crime, those who receive higher income from criminal activities would choose involvement in crime. Crime increases as one's market wage falls relative to the rewards associated with crime and decreases if the risk of being apprehended after committing a crime or the penalty for being convicted of a crime rises. Available evidence suggests that individuals are more likely to commit property crimes if they had lower wages or less education. But the occurrence of violent crimes, including murders, is typically found to be unrelated to economic opportunities. More likely if people are from privileged backgrounds, educated enough and prosperous enough to concern themselves with more than economic subsistence or engage in criminal activity. These factors could outweigh the effective opportunity cost on individuals' decisions to become involved in terrorism. An immediate remedial action is need to be taken against the people who are in loss, greed and disgust. Within nations, the most deprived people and groups are almost never involved in civil violence. Who are repressed, inactive, unhappy, destructive, reckless, disordered, antisocial, bold, aggressive express their aggression for self-preservation and control over authority. When any injustice is imposed on us, we tend to withstand that with extreme patience. But that only means we are indifferent. When it is time to oppose, we oppose in an extreme manner. The most striking aspect of our society is extreme inequality. Theories emphasizing versions of absolute deprivation, relative deprivation, or implicit or explicit aspiration achievement gaps. In these theories, actual living standards fall short of an expected or desired standard. Frustration then generates aggression. Violent conflict is likely to be the outcome. Higher rate of unemployment and illiteracy, destruction of homes and sources of livelihood, extreme poverty lead to extremist position. Programs leading to poverty reduction and need-based development can reduce it. Political, ethnic, linguistic or religious are the shades of extremism. Inequality, injustice, discrimination leading to particular mode of thinking, occupation and culture of victimization were major factors contributing towards extremism and terrorism. 3 categories of violence are self-inflicted violence, such suicide represents the fatal outcome. Other types suicide is self-destructive but not lethal, for example, self-mutilation. Interpersonal violence specified according to the age or sex of the victim, either among acquaintances or among persons who are not acquainted. Other types of interpersonal violence include child abuse, bullying, harassment and criminally linked violence such as assault and homicide. Organized violence is violent behavior of social or political groups motivated by specific political, economic or social objectives. Armed conflict and war may be considered the most highly organized types of violence. Other examples include racial or religious conflicts occurring among groups and gang or mob violence. This violence ranges from street crime, such as muggings, robberies, and hijacking to kidnappings, murder, drug-related violence, and organized crime conducted by gangs to assaults, sexual violence, and personal abuse. It inhibits productivity and income-earning capacity, affects the investment climate, destroys infrastructure, and disrupts delivery of services. The magnitudes of violence and deprivation where frustrations and discontents of the societal groups and younger generation can be easily politicized. Terrorism does not happen in a vacuum, but rather occurs for reasons of economic degradation, as well as social and political alienation. Terrorism is defined as the sustained, clandestine use of violence, murder, kidnapping, bombings, to achieve a purpose. It is an attack on human dignity. It is a justification of hatred, intolerance and violence. It spawns fear and insecurity and anarchy. The values of universal human rights, of individual liberty, freedom, equality, respect of human dignity, as well as fundamental rights, freedom of speech, thought, conscience and religion are despised, rejected or denied in religious/right-wing and left-wing extremism. Another example of extreme inequality is our education systems. The interesting aspect among the streams of education is they can hardly tolerate each other. There is always a sense of deprivation. Religious fanaticism grows where poverty exists. For some people here, religion is both a refuge and a weapon. When they don't have anything to look forward to, they seek refuge in religion, which is also a type of drug. Some among them use religion as a weapon to take revenge on the economically privileged section of the society. On the other hand, political extremism and religious extremism find themselves together when it comes to serving interests. Extremism, be it political or religious, basically represents the state of mind whether it is on political conflict or religious conflict. The only difference is in poor countries it may lead to outbursts of violence within the country, whereas in rich countries it may lead to outbursts of violence against other countries. Religious violence, also called communal violence. If sense of religious value, morality, reformation, administration is imposed upon someone, natural vital force falls in conflict. The support of real intention or soul hides into unconscious that foils the complete development. He becomes selfish for the whole life. Extremism's aims are to achieve an authoritarian, totalitarian, centralized power system, and eliminate class distinction. Ethnocentricity, often in the form of overt racism and nationalism, are at the core of an ideology that claims superiority over all other values. Extremism is essentially an ideological position, in which rigid, exclusionary and fundamentalist positions are taken on particular, political, religious, ethnic, identity-based or other issues. Terrorism is one pattern of extremist activity. Insurgency, in turn, refers to mass-based and violent anti-state movements. Political extremism derives its authority, objectives and rationale from explicitly secular political ideologies. Religious extremism often includes political components, derives its primary justification from religious authority or identity. It is in the revealed texts and the divine will that such extremism is rooted. This is a critical shift. While political extremists are susceptible to a realistic strategic rationale, religious extremists may seek their goals in the other world and consequently pursue ends that do not submit to what we regard as common sense or a general political or strategic logic. Suicide bombers clearly are not motivated by the prospect of their own individual economic gain. Although it is possible that the promise of larger payments to their families may increase the willingness of some to participate in these lethal missions, their primary motivation results from their passionate support for the ideas and the aims of their movement. Hate crimes are commonly defined as crimes against members of religious, racial, or ethnic groups because of their group membership, rather than because of their characteristics or actions as individuals. Hate crimes include acts of violence as well as destruction of property, harassment, and trespassing. Economic deprivation is a crucial determinant of hate crimes, but neither cyclical downturns nor longer-term regional disparities in living standards appear to be correlated with the incidence of a wide range of hate crimes. But if there were a direct causal effect, one would expect hate crimes to rise during periods of economic hardship, rather than to economic conditions. It points to a breakdown in law enforcement, as well as official sanctioning and encouragement of civil disobedience, as significant causes of the occurrence of hate crimes. There are other situations in which countries undergoing a civil war did not provide a breeding ground for international terrorism, so it is unclear how much one should extrapolate from the relationship between economic development and civil war. And terrorism has arisen in many countries that were not undergoing a civil war. Programs to support secular education and democratization will make terrorism harder for terrorists to win new recruits and sympathizers. Connection between poverty, low education, and terrorism is indirect, complicated, and probably quite weak. The fears that stalk most people are poverty, starvation, unemployment, and deadly diseases higher than nuclear, biological or chemical weapons. In the daily lives of most people, terrorism and weapons of mass destruction are remote and hypothetical threats. Poverty in all its forms is the greatest single threat to peace, security, democracy, human rights and the environment. Lack of effective education, weak education system, unjust social system are the root cause of poverty. If the poverty, not the poor, cannot be eradicated, it is not possible to curtail offense completely only by execution of the offender. It is not possible to eradicate offense from a discriminatory society by formulating penal code. Poverty is a breeding ground for discontent, and it increases the risks of conflict through multiple paths. Without productive alternatives, young people may turn to violence for material gain or feel a sense of hopelessness, despair and rage. If half of the people cannot get a job, cannot have a family, are frustrated in everything that they were trying to do, and who are knowledgeable today about what is happening, frustration and a lack of hope will drive instability. Not only global justice and human rights, but they are also vital to international and national security and stability. Emotional, irrational motives and triggers. Others emphasize the fundamentally rational nature of most disturbances. Civil violence is an outgrowth of ongoing, endemic social conflicts, a continuation of politics by other means as a product of the breakdown of established norms and constraints. Like eroded legitimacy of established political authorities, the decay of social institutions intermediate between state and family, or of a more diffuse moral solidarity in society at large. Broad shifts in social structure and especially in power relations are likely to change the frequency and forms of collective violence. Violence usually identify a combination of factors, including changes in context, group structure, rational calculations and moral indignation as important elements in understanding what happened. The notion that poverty generates desperation and anger, which in turn prompt violence, or not poverty but worsened conditions, may prompt violent protest. Mass people are not the problem, but the educated and white-collar people are the protectors of godfathers, possessors of black money, etc., and are responsible for the present state of human security. Instead of low market opportunities, lack of education, political conditions and long-standing feelings of indignity and frustration, perceived or real, that have little to do with economics. Most cases terrorism is less like property crime and more like a violent form of political engagement. In curbing violence, there should be politicians' leading role, giving up political rivalry, establishing social equality, generating employment, making best use of human resources, implementing the laws on human rights, reforming the education system, especially religious education. Impunity means exemption from punishment or loss. Impunity is especially common in countries that lack a tradition of the rule of law, where the judiciary is weak, suffer from corruption, or that have entrenched systems of patronage, or members of the security forces are protected by special jurisdictions or immunities. To account whether in criminal, civil, administrative or disciplinary proceedings, since they are not subject to any inquiry that might lead to their being accused, arrested, tried and, if found guilty, sentenced to appropriate penalties, and to making reparations to their victims. Delays and expenses are the biggest hurdles in getting justice, and these could be squeezed by alternative dispute resolution mechanism. Smooth delivery of justice could be guaranteed. Right to justice and access to justice is a basic human right, which is violated for the delay. Courts deal with both civil and criminal cases. A case goes through several stages. For a typical criminal case, for example, it starts with a FIR, then investigation, then submission of charge sheet. These preliminary stages are followed by trial, which itself has several sub-stages, such as deposition of witnesses, including that of the investigation officer and the experts, doctor, if there was a post-mortem, both of the prosecution and defense, and finally submission, arguments, by the lawyers of both sides. Lastly, comes the judgment. Now, each of these stages may have their own causes of delay. For example, the time taken from FIR to submission of the charge sheet, that is, how long the police take to complete the investigation. Then, at the stage or deposition by the witnesses, how long does it take? It means, do the witnesses come on the date fixed for, or there are a number of postponements for witnesses if they do not appear on the appointed dates. Witnesses may have moved away, the investigation officer may have been transferred, the doctor who performed the post-mortem may also have been transferred. Hence they cannot be located, may not get leave from their new workplaces, and thus, causing delay in their dispositions. The lawyers may not be ready to argue the case and hence regularly submits time petition. There is no legal bar to dispose of the criminal appeal, revision and motion without hearing the advocates of the parties and disposed of the same on merits. In almost all criminal cases, lawyers file time petition on the ground of absence of prosecution witness. Prosecution lawyers also refrain from filing the hazira of the witness. The prosecution lawyers are unwilling in disposal of criminal cases because they are not paid for the disposal of cases, but they are paid on daily basis by the government. The police officers do not execute the processes of court properly. They remain busy with many other assignments. Non-appearance of witnesses, particularly of government officers, such as medical witnesses, chemical expert witnesses, handwriting and fingerprint experts and the investigating officer on the date of trial. The P.B. and A.B. seek time for hearing the cognizance matter and for framing charge on the ground that the case diary is not yet received by them. Reluctance of appellate court to hear and disposal of criminal appeals and revisions because of impression that such disposal carries no significance. Lack of good lawyers, parties' unwillingness to take up the case, accumulation of cases, inadequate office equipment and machinery, obsolete laws, inefficient police department, delayed charge sheet, absence of witnesses, inadequate courts and judicial officers and absence of accountability, lack of state oversight and absence of standards for keeping up with felony cases and different approaches among judges and prosecutors in big cases are the reasons behind the delay in dispensation of justice. The cases can be disposed of expeditiously if the matters be handled in accordance of law. There must be a new provision that before filing civil suit a leave to file petition should be disposed of by the plaintiff's side. It would enable the judge whether the suit is filed for infringement of any civil right or it is filed for infringement of the rights of others. If it could be done, the trend for filing false cases for harassing other people would be stopped. The judge must frame the issue by himself and no adjournment for framing of issues should be allowed. The matter of discovery and inspection must be performed on the date fixed. In cognizable cases, from beginning to end, the role of investigation officer is important for starting the trial of the case. The trial could be started within short time if the investigation is completed within the specified time given in the Code of Criminal Procedure. Speedy trial system. The investigation officer working on a particular case has to hand over the accused to the court within 24 hours along with the first information report. Then the police officer has to submit the detailed report explaining the alleged involvement of the accused to the court in the next 7 days. The accused is then given 30 days to deny the charge against him and plead his innocence. In the instance in which the main accused cannot be captured by the police, the is to be produced to the court in 7 days. If the court feels that there is not much chance of apprehending the accused, it can order him to surrender in 7 days through a public notice in a daily paper. In this kind of situation, the court has to continue with the legal procedure without the accused and complete the case in 60 days' time. Once the investigation is complete, the court has right to issue bail to the criminal if it feels so. Recommendations. Alternative dispute resolution, ADR, could be encouraged for faster resolution of cases throughout out-of-court proceedings that generally shorter than trials, less formal and less encumbered by complex rules of procedure. Effective mediation encourages the parties to talk to one another and come to an agreement that allows win-win situations, which could not happen through litigation. In compoundable cases, parties are to be allowed to reach any compromise even during investigation and new rules and orders should be made for doing so. Effective coordination between the prosecution and the investigative officers is needed. Collecting witnesses by police officers should be quickened to expedite the cases. Nowadays, public prosecutors and government pleaders do not take proper steps in conducting their own cases. To make them accountable, necessary laws should be introduced. Mandatory provision may be made for specific period of time for filing a police report. In order to get impartial investigation into criminal cases, the investigation authority should be independent from police authority. The investigation department may be set up in each district. Penal provision may be introduced and new law may be enacted to ensure the appearance of public witnesses before the court on the date for trial. Strict law is needed to prevent vested quarters from filing of false cases. Adequate steps are needed to provide security to those who seek justice and go to court as witnesses. Extreme actions should be taken against touts and corrupt lawyers and police who misguide or trap innocent people seeking justice. Police departments should be allowed to function neutrally without any ruling party influence. Salary and logistic support for the police should be increased. New rules and orders may be introduced in fixing limited time for serving summons. Effective laws are to be enacted in respect to the execution of decrees and time limit must be imposed on for doing it. For speedy disposal of suits and cases, time limit must be set upon the conducting lawyers, especially in respect of taking adjournment by enacting new laws. Appointment of adequate judges and courtrooms are needed for speedy disposal of both civil and criminal cases. Efficient and effective court management and court administration are needed for speedy disposal of cases. For doing so, more strict rules and orders have to be introduced. Audio-video system should be introduced for recording evidence. Modern information system in all courts through computerization has to be introduced by enacting necessary rules and orders. The process of the separation of the judiciary from the executive should be quickened and transparency in appointing judges in the court be ensured. Any political influence on the judiciary must be stopped. The prime factors of professionalism are adherence to and enforcement of laws of the land without any bias and fear or favor, management skill, technical competence, recognition of performance etc. To develop management skill, reform measures should start from the very first stage, that is recruitment. What we have in us of the image of God is the love of truth and justice. Let us have justice, and then we shall have enough liberty. The triumph of justice is the only peace. If somebody does not try to protect himself from doing dishonest activities or vices, gradually, he will sink down to a world of vices. Attain normalcy in your nature instead of toughness. A sexual offender gets 3 kinds of punishments in this world itself. His earning and longevity will decrease and his face will become gloomy. And in the life hereafter a sexual offender will get 3 punishments. Those are Allah will remain angry with him, his activities will be very strictly judged and he will go to hell. Traitors and rebels are to be killed secretly. Punishment of a person who defames his parents is to cut down his tongue. If he injure then physically the same kind of the offender is to be cut down and the killers of parents are to be punished with painful death. One may refrain from illicit connection with women, drinking wine, gamble, murder etc. influenced by vile women, dispirited drunkards, cheater gambler and deceitful terrorists. Crime preventive punishments should be such that nobody farther dares to commit such a crime. Such offenders should be given such punishment that he becomes physically and mentally crippled. After being physically weak, invalid, afraid and terrified, he cannot commit any further offense, and could not avail these opportunities although he gets such scopes easily. Every criminal can be uprooted. Crime decreases when there is no opportunity for it. Morals are corrective messiahs of characters. Somebody shows much proficiency outwardly but can't do anything practically. Sometimes threat for punishment is more effective than advices. To bring a dishonest man to the right path by sweet words is like making the saline water of the sea sweet by drops of honey. When a dishonest man is dishonored and harassed, he realizes his faults and may become an honest and courteous man. An extreme unruly man cannot be corrected without a painful punishment. Defamation and rebuke is an excellent measure for correction of one's conduct. Although it is indecent and cruel, yet its result is good. When somebody is repeatedly rebuked publicly, he loses sense of prestige and it does not bring a good result. A man is spoiled by cruel punishment, negligence, oppression and hatred. On the other hand, he becomes honest and gentle by sympathy. One can be forgiven for his sins if he refrains himself from repeating sins. A sinful soul is purified with the fire of knowledge. Do such acts by which you can get rid of sins or negative attitudes. To bring a man back from ignorance, sins or dishonesty to the path of honesty is just like giving life to a dead body. Everybody is to correct his character himself. Every bad habit is to be corrected in a separate way. Exam for a reformation of character. The way to get rid of all sins is to control one's tongue. The ways to control one's sense organism are to wear a single pair of clothing, limited eating in a single utensil, and realizing the temporary state of life by passing time in a forest, beneath a tree, in a open space, and in a graveyard. Keeping away from sins and interest for virtuous acts bring purity in a man's heart. Give up cruel nature, then you want to suffer from repentance. There is no such guilty person in this world who cannot be corrected. There is no mistake or wrong in the world which cannot be amended. No mistake is mistake if it is amended. If you want to correct anyone, then take help of him who loves the far more. Corrective measure of parents can be tolerated, but in the corrective measure of a watchman insult is more than correction. Be a friend first and take a corrective measure, otherwise your advice will bring opposite result. You cannot refrain one from evil acts without loving him. A seen prayer and an unseen love coordinates with each other. Love covers all sins. One can scarcely remain safe from imperfection set by human. So it is better to take it easy. Feel mercy for the sinners. Hate a sin, not a sinner. A wine shop cannot spoil a man who is basically good, as a church cannot rectify a man who is basically bad. A bad character can be corrected through hard labor and preserves. A man cannot become a purely virtuous man if he cannot fight against sins. Bad people forgive their sins repeatedly and good people leave that. Bad people try to hide their faults and good people leave those. We should leave egoism, grouping and envy once for all. We should be tolerant like the world. If we can do it, the world will come under our control. Whatever criticism we do against others is in fact against ourselves. Correct the smaller world which is under your control, then the greater world will automatically come under your command. It is hard to change a man if he is not habituated to do so. The toughest job is to decide something. If it is done, then the rest job is too easy. Take corrective measure against a wrong secretly. Be polite while advising. Only he can be corrected who has the quality for it. A man cannot correct somebody else till he corrects himself. He who keeps other clean does not normally cleans himself. As a stone-based diamond cuts a stone-based gems into pieces, sins of a foolish also smashes him. He is the best man who commits the minimum sins, as nobody is free from sins and defects. Envy, anger, fear, etc. are all the part and parcel of life. But the rare property which the other creatures don't have, but a human being have consciousness. We should always try to rectify our conscience. Love is required for that.